On December 16, 1944, a German offensive known as the Battle of Bulge was a major turning point in World War II. It was the bloodiest and biggest battle that the American troops had ever faced. The German swift advance to the Ardennes Forest created a massive bulge in the Allied front. The battle ended on January 25, 1945, an Allied victory, and changed the course of the war. This was the last major German offensive of World War II and started the downfall of the once so powerful Nazi Germany. In 1944, Germany's grip on World War II had increasingly fallen off after Allied invasions on Normandy Beach had pushed the Germans back into their own territory on the Western Front. The Soviet Union had also dragged the Germans back and was planning to launch a winter invasion in Poland. While the Allies were pushing the Germans back in Italy, it seemed like Germany was getting squeezed from all sides. Each time the Nazis lost another occupied territory, they seemed to get weaker, and Hitler noticed this immediately. Further, to regain domestic control and the military initiative on each front, he would have to launch an offensive on the Western Front, hoping the Allies' alliance would shatter and he could focus on the Soviet Union. The ball was in Hitler's court, and factories started making more German tanks and guns in 1944 than ever before. Also, Hitler started gathering men for the last reserve and changed the conscription age from 18 years old to 16, allowing more men to join the war. But the morale of the Germans had never been lower. Their guns were mostly stolen from the Soviet soldiers and showed the low quality of their new reserves. But on the 16th of September, 1944, Hitler discussed his plans for the offensive with his generals. Even with his generals opposing the idea, he still carries out the plan confidently. The Americans didn't expect the Nazis to attack for a number of reasons. Mainly, the Germans were not nearly given enough supplies for the counterattack. Panzer Army generals told Hitler that they needed around 30 million gallons of oil to complete the journey, but were only given 11 million, not even enough to reach their main goal, Antwerp, and generals were told they're going to steal any other fuel they needed. Another main reason was the harsh fighting conditions within the Ardennes Forest. Known for being naturally impenetrable and combined with record-setting low temperatures as that weather, would freeze soldiers to death. But the Allies were not doing much better. After their quick advance through France, pushing the Germans back to their own territory, most of their troops on the front had either been severely wounded, under-trained recruits, or reserves to fill the space, especially in the Ardennes sector, where low amounts of troops were stationed, right in the heart of the German attack. The American troops were not nearly given enough winter gear, as they never expected to get attacked, and with Nazi Luftwaffe being no match for the American Air Force, the heavy snow stopped the Americans from constantly bombarding the Germans from above. We can now see why Hitler was so eager to attack where and when, but not how. There would be 3 panzer armies across the 60-mile front, consisting of the 6th, 5th, and 7th. Firstly, the 6th SS Panzer Army, the strongest of the 3, was commanded by Sepp Dietrich, and the goal was to cross the Meuse River and continue advancing to Antwerp, the Allies' main port city where they received all of their supplies. Gudvald Stedt, the commander-in-chief West, explains his view on the battle after the war, stating, "If we had tried to reach the Meuse, we should have got down on our knees and thanked God, let alone try and reach Antwerp." Next, the 5th Panzer Army, commanded by Hasse von Windhüffel, was to establish a front line around Brussels, supporting the 6th. Finally, Erich Brandenberger's 7th Army was to prevent the southern flank by George S. Patton's 3rd U.S. Army. But Brandenberger's army, consisting of no tanks and new soldiers, were by far the weakest of the 3 and would not hold off the Americans for long. Although, due to Allied technological failures, the American armies were spread thinly, not knowing when or where the Germans were going to attack. The U.S. armies also were not accustomed to the Ardennes, mainly because most of their previous advancing had been in planes, or depended on speed, not power. Roughly 80,000 Americans were in the Ardennes sector, and 200,000 Germans on the front before the battle started. When the forecast showed for bad weather, the Germans put their foot on the gas. It was all quiet on the Western Front until... Fire! At 5:30 a.m., German artillery pounded the Allies for 90 minutes. Right after, the German infantry charged forward to clear paths for the tanks to follow. In the north, problems were already rising. The 6th Panzer Army attempted to take Elsenborn Ridge, but were stopped in the tracks by the 99th Infantry Division. Although the 5th Army seemed to have more success, crushing everything in their path as American armies were severely underprepared. Finally, in the most southern sector, the 7th Army was stuck on the river. The sun set at just 4:30 p.m., a static day for both sides. The next day, in the most northern sector, Hakeem Piper, leading the 1st SS Panzer Division, is aggravated at the slow pace of his regiment, and decides to speed up the process by committing war crimes. As they advanced through the American-occupied cities, instead of wasting time by escorting prisoners out of the cities, Piper decides to execute almost 250 American troops. Known as the Malmedy Massacre, it showed the true intentions of the Germans. After the Americans realized the seriousness of the situation, 250,000 American and British troops arrive on the battlefield. In Bestel, 15,000 American troops harshly defended the city of Bestel, knowing the importance of the city, so when the Germans encircled the 101st Airborne Division, they decided to stay put. They're trapped in the city being surrounded by the Germans, with a ratio of troops being 1 to 5. As the 101st constantly defended the city, they received a message from the Germans saying, "Surrender or be flattened." Anthony C. McAuliffe, the commander of the 101st, angered by this message, famously screamed out, "Nuts!" And that's what they replied to the Germans, although they didn't understand what it meant. So when they asked if the message was negative or positive, the American replied with, "It means go to hell," which the Germans understood, but the trapped Americans were severely low on supplies and would be no match for the Germans currently. But the day came where clear skies arrived, and 241 American transport planes came from above, supplying the 101st and stopping the crisis. But the main problem was still there. After an Allied general meeting, Dwight D. Eisenhower and General George S. Patton decided that Patton's Third Army would march north to reach outside of Bastogne and break the siege. The plan was steep, as reaching it in time would cause a challenge, but most of the Nazi forces had already run out of oil and were targeted by American bombing. After a couple days of waiting, early on Christmas Day, the Germans gathered troops north of Bastogne and struck, hoping to surprise them while they were celebrating. But while they did advance, getting 1 kilometer away from the city, they did not break through. The 4th Armored Division, a part of the U.S. Third Army, arrived days after and started advancing directly to Bastogne, cutting through the weak Germans at Assenois. They charged fast with tanks and troops and broke the gap, reuniting the Americans. The siege ended on December 27th, but the battle still continued. The farthest advance by the 2nd Panzer Army had just reached out of Dinant, but had increasingly slowed down. Same with the 6th Panzer Army, who had still not broken through Elsenborn Ridge. The battle had tremendously flipped sides as American artillery and bombing continued holding off the Germans. Hitler realized everything had slowed down and started another operation, known as Operation Base Plate. The goal was for the Luftwaffe to regain air superiority, since it was the only way the Germans could flip the battle. All 1,000 fighter planes on the front constantly attacked Allied airfields and aircraft on the ground, although the Germans were angry about how the battle turned out so far. A German Luftwaffe chief, Hermann Göring, ordered that if pilots returned without attacking or damaging enemy airfields, they would have to take off and fly another attack. But this had tremendously failed, as Allied aircraft could still easily be repaired, which was not the same case for the Germans. Although the fighting still continued in the first weeks of January, and the German supplies and morale were at all-time low, which led the Allies to slowly push back. Hitler was stubborn and would not give up hope, but as the retreating continued, they only had one decision. The Germans finally accepted their defeat and threw the white flag up on January 10, 1945. The battle was officially declared over on January 28th, but it didn't come without sacrifices. During the Battle of the Bulge, 8,600 American troops died, 21,000 missing, and 47,000 wounded, not to count non-battle casualties rising up to 20,000, mostly caused by frostbite and disease. For the Germans, 15,500 died, 27,500 missing, and 42,000 wounded. The mass destruction caused by the battle left its mark, as Belgian and Luxembourg towns were left to rubble, taking multiple years to rebuild. After a month of fighting, it was finally over, but the war wasn't. The Germans decided to move panzer armies on the eastern front of Hungary. With the winter offensive starting, it was the only option they had, but it was no use. The lines crumbled, with Soviets breaking through the remaining German units. As Hitler's mental and physical health declined, he knew the right decision. Just 4 months after the first artillery shells launched at the Americans, Germany had surrendered to the Allied forces, and the war in Europe was over. After 6 years, it mainly came down to one battle, the Battle of the Bulge. In the end, it was an unwinnable battle for the Germans from the start, with insufficient planning, poor battle tactics, and weak preparation, leading to failure. The battle was a total German defeat, and the underestimation of the Allies showed, with their strongest armies being rejected by the Americans. The Battle of the Bulge was a turning point in the biggest and deadliest battle ever. If proper precaution was set before it all started, who knows how history would have changed.